Have you ever heard a scream that made your blood run cold? Not from fear, but from the sheer wrongness of it. A sound that tears through everything you thought was safe and ordinary, and leaves nothing behind but horror. I did. And it came from my daughter. Before I tell you what happened, I want to know, where are you watching this from? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe people like Denise should never be allowed to hurt anyone again, hit that like button, because this story, this fight for justice, is far from over. I was just turning onto our street, hoping for a quiet evening. My mind was still stuck at the precinct, replaying reports and paperwork and the mindless noise of a long shift. Our cul-de-sac, lined with trimmed hedges and identical mailboxes, had always felt like a bubble, safe, suburban, controlled. But that illusion shattered in an instant. "Daddy, it hurts." The scream came out of nowhere, sharp, high-pitched, desperate. I slammed on the brakes before I even registered the sound. My instincts kicked in. I was out of the car and sprinting toward the source, my own house, heart pounding in a way that no foot chase or armed standoff had ever caused. And when I reached the front yard, I saw her, my Emily, my daughter, 15 years old, brave, resilient, beautiful, and crucified. Pinned to the side of the wheelchair ramp I had just finished building the weekend before, a nail driven through her palm into the wood like something out of a nightmare. Blood pooled beneath her hand, dripping down the smooth planks I had measured and cut and painted with my own hands. Her face was twisted in pain, tears streaking down her cheeks, body trembling with the effort not to scream again. Standing above her was Denise Langford, the vice president of our homeowners association, a woman who had always worn her authority like a crown and swung the HOA bylaws like a weapon. In one hand she held a hammer, in the other another long silver nail. Her lips curled in satisfaction, as if this horror was her form of justice. "This will teach you," she hissed, her voice venomous and low. "No unauthorized structures in Pinebrook Hollow, not even for pathetic little fakers who want to play victim for attention." Her words hit me like a second scream. I looked at Emily's wheelchair, discarded in the grass, shoved aside like trash. Her body was sagging, her good hand trying to keep her upright, her eyes wide and wild with panic. She didn't even see me yet. Behind Denise, two other HOA board members, Gregory and Linda, stood frozen. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They just watched, horrified, as if they had only now realized that Denise wasn't just enforcing rules. She was out for blood. I wanted to move, to shout, to stop it. But for a split second, I stood frozen, disbelief battling with the rage surging inside me. My daughter, nailed to a ramp. The ramp I built. The ramp that was supposed to give her freedom after the accident that took her ability to walk. The ramp Denise had called an eyesore and property value poison. Then Emily cried out again, "Please, I can't move." That broke me. I surged forward, my voice finally returning, booming with rage. "Get away from her!" Denise turned slowly, like she hadn't just committed one of the most vile acts imaginable. The hammer was still in her hand, the nail still poised, her eyes locking onto mine with a sneer. "Oh, look," she said, "Daddy's home." Her voice was so smug, so casual, it made my fists clench. Your little princess here thought her disability gave her the right to ignore community standards. But rules are rules. I approached slowly, deliberately. I knew I had to keep control. I wasn't just a father, I was Sheriff Nathan Carter. But in that moment I didn't feel like the law. I felt like a man on the edge of something violent. My hands were visible. My voice was low. "Remove the nail from my daughter's hand," I said, barely above a whisper. "Now!" Denise laughed. She actually laughed. This structure wasn't approved. We sent notices. Ignoring them has consequences. Maybe next time she'll respect authority. I filed the ADA paperwork, I said, taking another step closer. Federal law guarantees her the right to accessibility. This ramp is legal. Federal law doesn't override HOA covenants, she snapped, voice rising. This is my neighborhood, and if she needs special treatment, maybe you should have moved somewhere else. Behind me, Emily whimpered. I could hear her trying to stay still, to keep from tearing the wound further. Gregory, I barked without taking my eyes off Denise. First aid kit's in my cruiser. Go get it. Linda, call 911. Don't you dare, Denise spat. This is official HOA business. And that's when I reached into my jacket and slowly pulled out my badge. I held it up for her to see, letting the weight of what she'd just done settle into the air like a thundercloud. Nathan Carter, Sheriff of Crestfield County. Denise's face paled. You're the sheriff? Yes, I said, stepping between her and Emily. And you just assaulted my disabled daughter. That's a felony. You just picked the wrong child to hurt. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and sorrow, the kind of place where hope and pain live side by side in uncomfortable silence. Emily lay on the stretcher, her face pale, lips trembling, but she didn't cry anymore. She had done all her crying in our front yard while that woman drove a nail through her hand. The ER doctor, a veteran of 16 years in emergency medicine, stood over her wound with a look on his face I'll never forget. Not fear, not disgust, just pure disbelief. I've seen car crashes, burns, even a chainsaw accident once, he muttered while carefully irrigating the area. But never in my life. Never have I seen something like this. 7 stitches on the top, 7 on the underside. The nail had missed any major tendons or arteries, but just barely. They said she was lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollow. Watching her try not to flinch, her body rigid as the doctor worked, was harder than anything I'd faced in 2 decades of law enforcement. And when the nurse stepped out to grab gauze, Emily finally broke her silence. Why does she hate me so much, Dad? Her voice was so small, it barely reached my ears. I never even talked to her before. I never did anything to her. I reached out and took her good hand gently. I wanted to lie, to tell her that sometimes people lash out for no reason, that monsters like Denise were rare, but she'd already seen the truth. Some people, I said carefully, can't handle anyone who reminds them of what they're afraid of. Weakness, loss, change. They see someone different and it terrifies them, so they try to destroy what they don't understand. She nodded slowly, her eyes focused on a fixed spot in the ceiling. Last week, she whispered, she told me I should stay inside, that my wheelchair makes people uncomfortable. She said it ruins the perfect image of the neighborhood. I had never wanted to hit someone more in my life, and I've dealt with murderers. But this wasn't just cruelty, it was a rot. A sickness hiding behind pearls and committee meetings. I squeezed her hand. She's wrong. Everything she stands for is wrong. But the truth is, I didn't just feel rage. I felt helpless. Because the longer we stayed at that hospital, the more the reality of what we were up against started to settle in. Denise Langford wasn't just a petty tyrant in a blazer. She was connected. Her husband, Wallace Langford, sat on 2 development boards and had hosted fundraisers for 3 county judges. He was, as the phrase goes, old Crestfield money. And Crestfield money didn't get punished, not here. By the time I got back to the sheriff's office the next morning, the building was buzzing. Deputies looked up from their desks as I walked in wearing my full uniform, something I hadn't done in weeks. I didn't need to say a word. They'd already heard. Small towns talk fast. On my desk sat the preliminary incident report. Denise Langford had been released on bail at 2:07 a.m. Her husband had called Judge Milton Wilson directly. Of course he had. Ramirez, one of my oldest and most trusted deputies, approached me carefully. "She's out, already," he said. "Judge Wilson said it was a misunderstanding. The DA wants to talk to you, said he's considering all options." All options was legal code for plea deal, community service, a fine, maybe some therapy and anger management classes, no jail time, no felony record. And just like that, what Denise did to my daughter would be downgraded to a bad decision made in the heat of the moment. Over the next few days, my worst fears came true. The DA called it a regrettable incident, but told me privately he wasn't confident a jury would convict. Denise was claiming Emily had fallen onto the nail during a removal attempt of an unapproved structure. She said it was all a misunderstanding, an accident. And the kicker? Gregory and Linda, those two cowards who witnessed the entire thing, suddenly couldn't remember exactly what happened. "They were behind her," I said. "They saw everything." "Not enough to testify," the DA replied. "And the footage from your home security system. No audio." Meanwhile, Emily was unraveling. The pain in her hand was being managed with medication, but the emotional damage ran far deeper. She flinched at every knock on the door, every creak of the house. She stopped going outside entirely. When I offered to take her to the park or even just for ice cream, she shook her head and stared out the window. She was afraid. Not of the world, but of her, Denise Langford. And the HOA. They didn't stop. Every day a new notice showed up taped to our door. The ramp was too steep. The mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Our grass was 1/4 inch over the acceptable length. The flowers I planted for Emily? Non-compliant species. They were doing everything they could to grind us down, to show that we didn't belong. And I did what I'd always done. I followed procedure. I documented everything, filed complaints, trusted the process. I had spent my life believing in the law, upholding it. But now I could see exactly what it was worth when people like Denise were allowed to walk through it untouched. Then the DA called again. They were reducing the charges, misdemeanor assault, a fine and mandatory therapy sessions. That was it. After all the blood, after the trauma, after watching my daughter get nailed to a ramp like a criminal, that was all she'd get. I hung up the phone and sat in silence. Something in me shifted, not broke, shifted. If the system wasn't going to protect my daughter, I would. Not as a father, not as a sheriff, but as a man with nothing left to lose. I started with Denise's file. Over the last 5 years, there had been 27 complaints filed against her with the HOA and local authorities. Allegations of harassment, discrimination, physical intimidation. Buried. All of them. Thanks to her husband's connections. 3 families had moved out of Pinebrook Hollow after run-ins with her. One elderly veteran had a heart attack after she blocked his driveway during a shouting match about an antenna. But no one ever pushed back hard enough. Until now. Then I pulled HOA financial records. As sheriff, I could access them under the guise of an internal fraud investigation. And what I found was even worse than I imagined. Over $300,000 in HOA funds had been spent on beautification projects, most of which had no paperwork, no bids, no contractor records. Curious how every one of those projects went through companies linked to Denise's cousins and in-laws. I also found evidence of selective enforcement. Homeowners she disliked were fined and penalized far more often than anyone else. But the final nail in her coffin? A property survey I ordered showed that Denise's grand colonial home, so proudly featured in last year's Most Elegant Residence HOA newsletter, had a portico that extended 6 full inches into public county land. A direct violation of the same code she had used to punish countless other homeowners. She had once forced a disabled veteran to remove his flagpole for a similar encroachment. Now she was guilty of the exact same thing. I didn't rush. I took my time. Every day that Emily struggled to open a jar with her injured hand, Every time she winced putting on a jacket, it made my focus sharper. And Denise. She continued her rounds like nothing had happened, walking past our house each morning to take documentation photos for the HOA, smug grin on her face. I waved at her every time, smiling just enough to let her wonder. Because I knew what was coming. And when I struck back, it wasn't going to be petty. It was going to be righteous. It was going to be precise. And it was going to bring her entire little empire crashing down. The HOA meeting was held in the community centre on a rainy Thursday evening. The notice had gone out 2 days before, marked emergency session, mandatory attendance. And in Pinebrook Hollow, when something is marked mandatory, people show up. They came in waves: young families, retirees, dog walkers, realtors, half of them probably expecting another tedious discussion about mailbox colours or lawn edging. What they got instead was the beginning of a reckoning. I walked in wearing my full sheriff's uniform for the first time in weeks, polished badge gleaming, boots echoing against the tile floor with every step. But I wasn't alone. Pushing herself beside me in her wheelchair, wrapped in her favourite denim jacket with her freshly stitched hand resting in her lap, was Emily. She held her head high. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was thunderous. Denise Langford sat at the long folding table in the centre of the room, surrounded by the other board members. She wore a sharp blazer, her usual expression of faux charm fixed tightly to her face, like a mask that had been cemented into place. But when she saw us enter, something flickered behind her eyes. Maybe doubt, maybe fear. Whatever it was, it didn't last long. She stood, cleared her throat, and addressed the room like she still believed she was in charge. Good evening, everyone. Before we begin tonight's discussion on ongoing violations and landscaping compliance, I'd like to remind all attendees that this is a business meeting and... Actually, I said, stepping forward and wheeling Emily to the front, we're here for a different reason. As County Sheriff, I'm here to present evidence of criminal activity committed by this HOA board. The silence that followed was immediate and total. You could feel the tension in the air shift like the pressure before a storm. Denise blinked. Excuse me? You heard me. The doors behind us opened, and 2 of my deputies walked in, each carrying a box filled with thick folders. They moved efficiently, handing out evidence packets to every homeowner in the room. Dozens of hands opened manila folders in unison, eyes widening as they flipped through bank statements, signed complaints, redacted reports, and county records. Gasps echoed around the room. Whispers turned into murmurs. People were connecting the dots. Denise's face flushed red as she stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly behind her. "This is harassment," she barked. "You can't come in here and—" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Your husband," I said, "is currently being questioned by federal investigators about fraudulent shell companies connected to over $300,000 in missing HOA funds. The so-called beautification projects were used to launder money into businesses owned by your relatives." A wave of shocked gasps hit the room like a domino effect. I wasn't finished. I placed a document in front of her. "This is a county order for the removal of your portico. It violates zoning laws by encroaching on public land. You have 48 hours to dismantle it before the county does it for you. The same treatment you enforced against others." Her voice was shrill now, on the edge of panic. "You can't do this. I will sue you. I will destroy you." I met her eyes. "You already destroyed something. My daughter's peace, her safety, her hand. And now you want to pretend this is about a meeting. You made this personal the moment you laid hands on my child." I turned back to the room. "As of this evening, the Crestfield County Sheriff's Office has placed Pinebrook Hollow's HOA under official receivership. An emergency election will be held next week. Deputies will remain available to take statements. If you've experienced similar treatment, Now is your chance to speak." Emily sat there quietly, her injured hand resting in full view. The room looked at her, not with pity, but with shame. Not a single homeowner moved to support Denise. She had ruled with fear and fake smiles for too long, and now the mask had cracked. Her hands trembled as she pointed at me, trying to reclaim her ground. "This isn't over, Carter. You have no idea who you're dealing with." I lowered my gaze to her hand, still clutching the edge of the table, and then looked her straight in the eye. "Remove your hand," I said, "or I'll consider it assault on a law enforcement officer." She jerked back like I had burned her. Silence hung in the room. Emily looked up at her with eyes far older than her years. Calm, cold. "The doctor said I might never get full feeling back," she said softly, but her words carried weight. "But every time I touch something and feel that numbness, I'll remember your face. I'll remember what you did." Denise's face crumpled, but she tried one last gasp at saving herself. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to." I cut her off. "Save it for your trial. And if you're hoping for mercy, you won't find it here." She looked confused. "There wasn't even audio in the footage. You said so." And then, for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to smile. "No," I said. "There wasn't on the house cameras, but my body cam was rolling the moment I stepped out of my vehicle. It picked up everything, including you calling my daughter an attention-seeking brat and bragging that you were going to teach her a lesson." The realization landed hard. Her knees almost gave out. She gripped the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. And then I dropped the final nail in the coffin. "We're pursuing federal hate crime charges. Assault on a disabled minor. That carries a mandatory minimum. No probation, no plea deal. 5 years." Over the next few weeks, everything Denise had built, her empire of intimidation, her social connections, her false sense of control, came crashing down. Federal charges were filed. Her husband's assets were frozen. Their elegant house, with its illegally constructed portico, fell into foreclosure. Denise was denied bail and waited in a cold cell for the trial that would decide her fate. A new HOA board was elected, this one led by Mr. Ramsey, the Vietnam veteran whose flagpole Denise once had removed. One of their first decisions was to officially name Emily as the neighborhood's accessibility consultant. The ramp remained, untouched and respected, and soon it was joined by others, as elderly residents realized they, too, had been suffering in silence, under a system that never cared about their needs. With the tyrant gone, the community began to heal. 6 months after that awful day, Emily rolled down our new walkway toward a group of neighborhood kids, waiting to walk with her to the park. She wore short sleeves that day. The scar on her hand was still visible, a pale reminder of the pain she had endured, but she didn't hide it anymore. As she reached the end of the ramp, she paused and looked back at me. "Do you think people can change?" she asked. Across the street, Gregory and Linda were helping another neighbor install a bench under the oak tree, both of them having finally testified against Denise after weeks of reflection and guilt. "Yes," I said, "when good people find their courage, everything can change." Emily looked down at her hand, traced the scar lightly. Then it was worth it. Not the pain, but standing up to her. Someone had to go first. As she turned and wheeled away, I stood there watching her join her friends, laughter floating in the air again. And I thought about the nail Denise had driven into her hand. It was meant to pin her down, to punish her for being different, to put her back into the shadows where people like Denise think anyone with a disability belongs. But that nail didn't break Emily. It broke them. It cracked a system built on silence and fear, and it gave me the resolve to swing the hammer of justice with everything I had. Because sometimes It takes just one act of cruelty to wake a sleeping giant. And sometimes, the hand that drives the nail never imagines who might be holding the hammer when the day of reckoning comes.